When you picture your funeral, do you want it to be a somber, respectful affair or a party? I recently had a chance to talk with owner Chris Tharp of Tharp Funeral Homes about how funerals in this area have changed over the years. First, we talk about the history of Tharp Funeral Home. Take a look.
Sure. Well, we're a third-generation family business. My grandfather came to Bedford, Virginia in 1931, worked his way up, eventually purchasing the funeral home in 1960 from the previous owners. Then my father came along in 1972 when he finished college, and I came along in 2000. So it's been something that, from our family's perspective, we've seen tremendous change over those three generations. My grandfather can tell you, and he often did, I worked at the funeral home in high school growing up, and he and I would be out driving around the county, and he would tell me about funerals that had taken place in people's homes, and people that had been buried on their farmland, throughout Bedford County. That's, interestingly enough, something that's coming back into vogue. More and more families are starting to do that again, believe it or not. But in that era, you really saw families participating more in funerals. Then really through the later 60s, 70s, and 80s, when cremation began in this area, families sort of took a step back and did not participate in services as much. But now we're seeing a return to that. We had just last month two different families that one opted to be buried on his farm in Bedford County, and the other opted to be scattered at his lake home down at Smith Mountain Lake, right off the dock. They had a party there at the end of his property. So we're seeing things come full circle in a way, with families participating more. But I think probably the biggest change in recent years that we've seen has been from the baby boomers. They're a generation that have done everything their own way, in an interesting way. And I heard a gentleman say the other day to me, he said, "Well, you only die once." So exactly. So I want to make it something special, and I want to make it something that people remember. So we have people that are coming in every week that are pre-planning their arrangements, and they're making sure it's exactly the way they want it. And that's a real characteristic of the baby boom generation. They want to have control of things, and they want to do things their way. And we're just excited to be able to help them with it. Obviously, we tell them when they're doing their pre-planning, now, don't use this anytime soon. It's something we want to put off the funeral as long as we can, but they have a lot of satisfaction and a lot of real peace of mind of knowing when their time comes, things are going to happen exactly the way they want it.
And it relieves some stress from the family by pre-planning and potentially saves you money, right?
Oh, my goodness. A person who pre-plans his or her arrangement will save on average over 30%. And that's because of something called emotional overspending. Families, and we hear this from time to time in the funeral home, they'll come in and say, well, he was a good dad, or he was a good husband, and this is the last thing I can do for him is buy this funeral. Well, people tend to make emotional decisions that aren't really in keeping with clear-headedness. So that's one of the reasons we really advocate at Tharp. Do your planning in advance. Take that stress off your family. Make sure they don't spend too much. Make sure they don't get something you don't want. That's, again, I was mentioning the baby boomers, and they're terrific at this because they have a budget, they know what they want, and the great thing about pre-planning, they can go home and think about it. There's no pressure to have to make a decision that day, and that's the way it ought to be.
My husband always jokes that he wants a funneral and not a funeral. Do you get a lot of people in here that's just like, we want to live it up. We want to have a fun party.
You tell your husband that Tharp puts the fun back in funeral when you see him next time. It's funny. We're seeing more and more folks, instead of having a memorial service, they're having a cocktail party. They're having something that the funeral home is not even involved with, and sometimes it might be at the country club, it might be at their lake home, it might be in their backyard. And that, to me, is wonderful because it's people taking responsibility and taking charge of their own arrangements and making them exactly what they want.
And if you'd like to find out more about Tharp Funeral Home and Crematory, they have 4 area locations: Lynchburg, Madison Heights, Bedford, and Smith Mountain Lake. For more information about any of these locations, 434-237-9424. Also, lots of good information online at tharpfuneralhome.com.